this week. Now, we're taking your calls and asking whether you have been affected by A&E waiting times. The number is 0207 862 2222. Pick up the phone to share your experience. Now, we're asking this because in January, over 54,000 people waited more than 12 hours in A&E in England. That second highest figure on record. That's up 25% compared to the month before. A&E and ambulance services experienced their busiest ever January. 2.23 million people attended A&E. And there was more than a 10% increase in emergency admissions from A&E compared with the same month last year. Now, Kerry, I'm really glad that you're here because you've worked in the NHS for a very long time. You took a brief period where you were doing all your telly things, but then you went back to the NHS. So tell us about your experience.
Okay, so this is really close to my heart, and I decided to take a career break last week because for me it just become a little bit overwhelming, and I'm not at all surprised. So I'm not in the NHS at the moment, Alexis. Yeah. I don't work for the NHS. But for me, I'm not surprised that these wait times are there. I feel that before, one of the things that led me to take my career break was I worked in complaints. I worked as head of patient experience. And, I couldn't fit square pegs in round holes anymore. We wasn't able to, due to coming out of COVID and a 5-year recovery plan, coupled with doctor strikes as well, which I do not blame them at all, by the way. The government need to start offering some money there for sure. We have to keep bumping on people's surgeries, outpatients appointments and clinics, and as a result of that, their ailments are getting more serious and they need to attend A&E again. Something, if you're waiting for a colonoscopy, for instance, you're getting some tummy troubles and you are waiting for that, but actually you don't get it for 9 months, a year, 18 months down the line. Meanwhile, you're attending A&E for far more admissions because you've had maybe another flare-up of, and it might be celiac disease that you're waiting to be diagnosed with. So if you had the colonoscopy, you'd know to cut out wheat and therefore the flare-ups wouldn't happen. But meanwhile, you're not knowing that you've got that wrong with you, so you're attending A&E. And yes, the wait times, the doctors can do no more out there, but everyone is getting sicker.
Yeah, and you said something to me when we were discussing this in the green room, and it really struck a chord. You were saying all those sort of minor procedures, yes. And some not so minor, but perhaps a knee replacement, a hip replacement, which are not emergencies, but if you leave them unattended, they become an emergency.
Absolutely, they really do. Something that would be a routine procedure,
That's right.
we would call routine, then becomes an emergency. So someone that's able to get around on sticks may now be housebound, and then that has an impact on health and social care. It's massive.
Marvyn, have you had any experience of having to attend A&E?
Yeah, it's so funny. So, as I was nearing 40, I'm not 40 yet, just for everyone at home. As I was nearing 40, I thought, let me get some, have a look into my health and get some checkups done. And the process of going through all the key things that I needed to do took 9 months. This is just testing. And it took so long that I actually went abroad and I went and did it privately. And I did it in 4 days on my holiday. And I went in and out and they came and they told me what was up and I went and been able to come back and bring that information home. But I do feel like in A&E, they're amazing. I've taken my kids to A&E, I've gone A&E, I think absolutely amazing. But when it's ongoing care...
Did you have to wait a long time?
Not crazily, it was less than 3 hours. I was in and out in less than 3 hours and they were really thoughtful and kind about it. I absolutely have nothing to say about A&E, but I know the ongoing care for me has not been good enough and losing samples and things like that just isn't okay.
Well, let's hear what people are saying at home. Sheila has got in touch from Derbyshire. Sheila, welcome to the show. What would you like to say, Sheila?
I'd like to tell you that my son went to our local A&E department. After walking in with sort of discomfort in his chest, he ended up having a full checkup, chest x-ray, an ECG and a blood test. He was then waiting for the results, got the results off the doctor who gave him the okay, and that was all done within 4 hours. He was back home. It was unbelievable service.
That is a great experience.
It was.
It sounds, and I don't know whether I'm being unfair, Kerry, you can tell me if I am, it sounds like not the norm, but a sort of a one-off great experience. And we must say that, particularly in my experience of talking to people, and you have better experience than I, that the service that people get, they're always saying how great it is, but it is that wait time.
It is, absolutely. And we obviously have lots of, targets that we have to meet when we're in the NHS. And one of them is that 4-hour wait. And that's absolutely amazing, Sheila, that your grandson had that experience. I honestly, but it feels like that's no longer the norm. I feel we used to be able to...
That seems to be like the exception.
It really does seem to be the exception, and people are waiting longer times. And that's because people are sicker. And let me tell you, when you work in the NHS, whether you're a doctor or you're a nurse, you're part of admin or clerical stuff, you leave nothing at home. You bring your whole self to work the whole time. You give everything to your shift. You can do no more from the moment you clock in to the moment you clock home. But patients are getting sicker and those waits are becoming longer because of that. And we just need to start squeezing. We need to get our wait times down for other areas to alleviate A&E to a certain extent, because our patients there are sicker. And also primary care. So people are pitching up in secondary care because they maybe can't get an appointment with their GP, and A&E, of course, is 24/7. Right. So it's just more accessible.
Sheila, thank you. Great to start with a positive story there. Let's speak to Andrea in Colchester. Welcome to the show, Andrea. What was your experience?
Hi, Alexis. Basically, last November, the November before, I went to A&E with my mum. Now, she was actually called, she'd had a blood test, and she was called by 111, and it was a clinician working alongside them. This would have been about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and they asked us to basically drop everything, come to the A&E quickly, it's an emergency. So my mum had hyperparathyroid, so it was elevated levels of calcium, so which can be quite dangerous. So it was a case of drop everything, come down quickly. So we can send an ambulance, or if you're able to drive. So I opted to drive down there. So we went down there, and I was all kind of a little bit shook because, obviously it's not the normal thing that you're called to tell them, bring somebody urgently. Got there, they said the normal waiting times, and they give the average times is like 4 or 5 hours, which is, understandable. So when it got to 7 hours now, because the environment as well, at the time, it's since been improved a bit, but at the time they had these metal seats, the electronic doors were opening, and it was just letting all the cold air in. It was freezing cold. My mum already was on palliative care, and she was extremely sick with cancer as well. So it was she was literally skin and bones. And for me, it was really uncomfortable in there. So I can't imagine what it was like for her. So after 7 hours, I just thought, look, really can't do this. I spoke to the doctor, and I just said, you know what, it's been 7 hours now. We were told it's going to be about 4 or 5 hours. And she was just like, oh, well, last week people were waiting 24 hours. And I was just like,
not really
hang on a sec,
is it?
Yeah. At all. So it was just like, okay, so we were told 4 to 5 hours, at least be transparent, let us know what the situation is, and, that
Andrea, whilst you were waiting for those 7 hours, were people checking in on you and your mum, informing you, letting you know, look, it's going to be a little bit longer, or were you just sort of left there?
Just left there. I mean, my mum was on a drip, right, but we weren't given any updates to say that, okay, the time's going to be longer or anything like that. So it just when it got to the 7 hour mark, and they told us that last week they were waiting 24 hours, I was just like, right, forget it, I'm not putting my mum through this, we're going. So then we had trying to go and get them to take the drip off was another, people were saying, trying to question whether I had the authority to go and take her back out, even though I brought her in there. So I was just like, okay, it got to the point after about 45 minutes to an hour, if you're not taking the drip off, I'm going with the drip. And I was walking my mum out, and that's when they took the drip off. Right. Okay, but my thing is, this is 2020, well, okay, the timing was 2022, but, in this day and age, you go to a restaurant, they have a buzzer system that allows you to know, when your time is up, okay? We were only a 12-minute drive away. Why not let us know when to come in, when it's her time to come in, instead of putting people through that?
Andrea, thank you. I'll stop you there because I want to squeeze some more people in, but that's an experience you can relate to, I think.
Absolutely, and as being head of patient experience, you sound like you had a horrendous experience, and thank goodness, Andrea, you were there with your mum, because Andrea was clearly her mum's voice. Yeah. And to have that +1, your mum would have just sat there in the cold on palliative care, and you were there and you were her advocate. Thank you for being there, Andrea. That's massive. And actually, do you know what's key there? Communication. Why were they told to come immediately if they knew how to wait 7 hours? This is a lady that's on palliative care, and I'm sure maybe with a little bit more joined up working, more of a holistic approach, it might have been better that actually Andrea and her lovely mum were told to come back at 9 o'clock in the morning, and there'd been maybe more people on hand. But they waited probably until 9 in the morning anyway. So yeah, for me, it's a massive thing about communication there.
Yeah. Andrea, thank you for sharing your story. Let's speak to Georgina, who's called from Worcestershire. Georgina, what's been your experience?
Hello, everybody. My husband came home from work. He went to work at 7 a.m., normally a perfectly healthy man. He came home at 12 o'clock, noon, and he was confused. He thought it was evening meal time and said he didn't want any dinner, and he didn't want me to talk to him, and he didn't want a cup of tea. And initially I thought, oh, God, go back to work if you feel like that. He said, I'm going to bed. And then I thought, why does he think it's tea time? So he looked up at the clock and it was noon. So he ran in then and I realised he was in bed. I couldn't wake him up. He had his coat on and his boots on and everything. I got the thermometer. His temperature was 41. I phoned the ambulance. They said it'd be 5 hours. I phoned my GP. My GP came, diagnosed sepsis, and we were all told sepsis is an hour and what you've got to do. The ambulance came. The ambulance was fantastic because he's a big man and, I couldn't stand him. It took 3 of them to get him up and ready. They then took him off to A&E. He stayed in that ambulance for 29 hours. Now, I know that wasn't the ambulance's fault. It was A&E, the problems in A&E. Because he already had sepsis, he developed what is known as Parkinson's plus because he got pneumonia. And if you Google Parkinson's, sepsis and pneumonia, it equates to Parkinson's plus. He has multiple atrophy and has barely been out of bed, and that happened 18 months ago. Completely changed our lives, ended all of our retirement plans, ended his career.
Georgina, I'm so sorry I'm so sorry to hear what you've been through and what your husband's been through. So he was waiting in the ambulance at A&E for 29 hours.
Yeah, and his GP went in and called and said, he called the online registrar and said he was on ambulance 4945. He said 4945 got one of my patients in. He had sepsis. And obviously we have a lot of neurology appointments and things because my husband now doesn't know our address or our phone number, so I have to take him. And he gets really angry when I take him, and there are sepsis posters everywhere. Like, why do they put them up when they don't follow their own protocols?
Georgina,
I'm married to a man I don't know.
Georgina, thank you for sharing your experience, and I'm so sorry that you've had to go through this. Gary, have you heard of something so long, 29 hours?
Yeah, unfortunately, during COVID, it was the thing. But if I can provide any comfort to Georgina, and it sounds like you had the most horrendous experience, well, your husband, of course, but you as the loved one looking on, those wait times are shocking. However, if I can provide any comfort, it needs to be medically safe to discharge someone off the ambulance.
Yeah.
So, for instance, what you wouldn't have wanted is for your lovely husband to have been discharged from an ambulance setting. And make no bones, but they're like mini hospitals, the ambulances. Yeah. They've often got 2 people working on them, with them. And what you wouldn't want is then to be offloaded into a waiting room setting. So I know I'm playing devil's advocate massively here, but you wouldn't have wanted... And, of course, you need to act fast with sepsis. But if there wasn't that resus room available or there wasn't those medics around there and then to be able to take...
So in a sense, in the ambulance, you are being monitored by 2 people.
Yeah, I believe your husband
and they've got all the necessary equipment in the ambulance that if the worst was to happen, they can look after you there and then.
Definitely. They would then phone the red phone if A&E needed to come out and get him in quickly. But they obviously didn't feel at that moment in time that was the right place for her husband. I know it's hard to hear.
No, but that's a really interesting point, because I think for most people that I'd never thought of that.
They're like mini hospitals.
I had never thought of that. So it's brilliant. It's brilliant to have you on this topic. Look, Georgina, thank you for sharing your experience. I wish you and your husband all the best. I hope he does well in his recovery. But thank you for sharing your story with us.